How are you doing? It's David W. Williams, also known as the Retail Trader. And what I want to talk about today is the sports lotto's economic warfare against Black children. Miami high school football athletes cannot read. That last statement is going to be a generalization, but it kind of want to speak to what I'm talking about. And what I mean by the sports lotto is I mean this particular environment that you have where you have a large amount of people trying to play sports and only a small amount of people are actually going to be successful at it. So we know that most high school athletes have less than a 1% chance of making the NFL. We know that once you actually do make the NFL, you're probably going to play around 3.5 years or less before they wash you out of that league. Therefore, what we have is an environment to where a large amount of people, you have a large population pool, are all trying to get employed by this profession. However, even if they're successful, they're only going to play around 3.5 years, which means you can spend, I want to say, maybe 10 to 15 years of your life trying to be available to play in the NFL for 3.5 years. And we got to ask ourselves, is that really a good return on the investment into these particular children, or could that investment be spent somewhere else? However, one of the things that we're challenged with inside the United States is because so many people are addicted to football, because of the large gambling infrastructure that we've built around professional sports, because so many people professionally, their professional mobility is based on children being able to perform at a high level. And this is something I think most people don't understand because they never play sports at a certain level or their children have never been employed. We have a lot of grown people to where if children do not perform at a high level, they have no upward mobility in their job. And they've built their whole life around that. It's really not about this altruistic reason why they're investing in children. No, it's really the way if I can persuade and influence children to perform at a certain level, I can become successful in my profession. And it starts at the high school level, it goes all the way up to college. But I mean, college football is based around grown men needing children to play well so they can make millions of dollars. And they just now recently cut the children into the money pool. When I was coming up, the children were cut out of the money pool, and it was nothing but just grown people making all this money off of children. So what we have is we have a infrastructure, we have a business model, but we also have a culture based around taking a large percentage of the population, driving them into a very, very small amount of opportunity. And then because of all the economic incentives, but also the culture built around the sport of football, but not only football, other sports, it becomes a feedback mechanism where people literally look for their social status and being able to allow to participate in these environments. Now, how it ties into what I'm talking about is because I want to say maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, we had a really, really big argument around affirmative action. The Supreme Court came out against affirmative action to some level in college admissions. And a lot of people was waving their handkerchief and, kind of patting themselves on the back and saying, yeah, we did it. We got affirmative action, which the way affirmative action is presented inside the United States is presented as a race issue. So we got affirmative action out of colleges. So now everything's more fair and I guess equal across the board. I'm for getting rid of affirmative action if we get in college admissions, if we get rid of it for athletes. The question that's not being asked, and I know why it's not being asked, because nobody is going to pay money for somebody to do research on this particular topic, because the same colleges that a lot of these people work for benefit from athletics. Is, do athletes get affirmative action in college admissions? And we're going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. But really quickly, let's go to this video so we can get a little bit of a refresher, because I know we're dealing with an environment where people have very, very short memories and very short attention spans, to talk about how this topic of affirmative action in colleges was a thing at one time. And then we're going to roll into the rest of what I'm talking about. So let me bring that video up real quick.
The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday tossed out race-conscious student admissions programs in a sharp setback to 50 years of affirmative action policies aimed at increasing the number of Black, Hispanic, and other underrepresented minority students on campuses. Powered by the 6 conservative justices, with the 3 liberals in dissent, the nation's top court ruled in favor of a group called Students for Fair Admissions, founded by anti-affirmative action activist Edward Bloom. Here's Bloom, who spoke to Reuters earlier this month.
You cannot cure racial discrimination that occurred in the past with new discrimination today.
Bloom's group said Harvard and UNC unfairly discriminated in their admissions. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, said that students, quote, must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite. He added, at the same time, as all parties agree, nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. Critics who have tried to topple these policies for decades argue affirmative action policies are themselves discriminatory and say that giving advantages to one race is unconstitutional, regardless of the motivation or circumstances. But many institutions of higher education, like Harvard and the University of North Carolina, corporations and military leaders, have long backed affirmative action on campuses, not simply to foster racial diversity, but to ensure a talent pool that can bring a range of perspectives to the workplace and U.S. Armed Forces ranks. Zachary Wolf came to hear.
Okay, so that's pretty much it. So this was about 2 years ago. I remember this particular argument. And so the argument always has been, we can't stop past racism with new racism, or we can't stop past discrimination with new discrimination. But they're very limited to the scope of what they want to consider. And what I mean by that is, again, if we really study the way athletes are accepted into state universities, there's very much a way in which the regular student is being discriminated against in favor of the athlete. Now, there's an economic reason why that is taking place, but it is going on. And so we never hear about this particular scenario. We only hear about affirmative action from a race standpoint. We don't talk about affirmative action from a sex standpoint. And that's just a whole nother topic, because, again, the people that are paid to do research around this topic will never get paid to really do research around the fact that a lot of athletes at these major state universities would never academically qualify to be at these universities. And that is a fact. That's not my commentary. That's not my perspective. That's not my take. And so it's a lack of education in the population where they don't have the ability to be able to differentiate between the two. And we're going to talk about that. So it leads to an environment to where if you can play sports at a certain level, you get accepted into a particular university where, based on their grades, they should never be there. Ask the audience right now, do you know what the acceptance rate is for the university that you went to? Are you aware of it? And then if the acceptance rate for the university you went to is very, very low, and when I say low, I mean like under 40%, ask yourself, how do they get certain people into that school that don't really meet the grading criteria? So there's a guy on YouTube that kind of likes to talk about the fact that he went to UCLA as if he's the only person that went to UCLA, which is weird, but that's just, that's kind of what he hangs his hat on. However, the issue is that UCLA puts out a football team and a basketball team every year, right? If UCLA was so discriminatory in who they allowed into the school, how do they put out a football team and a basketball team every year? I'm supposed to believe that these people who have dedicated their life to sports across the board would meet the qualifications to get into some of these top tier universities. In this example, we're talking about UCLA. I'm supposed to believe that. I would if I didn't know any better, if I didn't play sports. But I know better, right? There's a show, a podcast of 3 ex-NFL players, and 2 of them went to a school in the state of Florida where their freshman acceptance rate is very, very low. And no disrespect to them, but neither one of those guys are that smart. Now, some of it has to do with football. But I know people that knew one of the guys on that particular panel in college, and they told me the guy was dumb as a box of bricks. And he still is dumb as a box of bricks. But he was able to get accepted into a school where the freshman acceptance rate is very, very low, especially for people coming out of state. He's not from the state of Florida. So you already know who I'm talking about. And he's just an example of people that are able to get access to some of these higher level state schools, some of these bigger state programs, but academically they never qualify. And so this is what I want you to understand. This is the sports lottery. And it becomes economic warfare against Black children, because what we don't do is say, how can we improve the situation for the masses of children in these economic disadvantaged areas? What we do is we just all push them into sports as if that's a solution to the problem, but it can't be a solution to the problem if less than 1% are going to ever make the NFL. If they do make the NFL, they're going to play less than 3.5 years. This narrative in 2025 is I need to play sports to get to college. No, you don't. Most people go to college because what do? They loan money to go to school. So you don't need to play sports to go to college, because most people are not going to play sports and they still have the ability to go to college. What do? They just take out a loan. I'm not promoting the loan. What I'm saying is a narrative that we need to take all these poor Black children, primarily poor Black boys, and push them into sports as a way of giving them economic mobility is false. Because if you want to go to college, all you got to do is go take out a loan and you can get accepted to somebody's college. I'm from the state of Florida. It's a lot of colleges in the state of Florida. Somebody will accept you. You do not need to play sports to get into college. So we've created sports as a solution to solve some of these problems for these low-income children, but it's really not a solution. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, because they're not getting an education and the sports is making them a better candidate for the school. I'm sorry, it's not as if they're getting an education, but the sports makes them a better candidate for school. So it makes them like a better holistic pick. They're not getting educated, but they're playing sports. And the majority of them are never going to go past high school. That's the majority. The ones that do make it to college, the majority are never going to go to the pros. So if no education is being taught to them on the way there, when their playing career is over, they don't have anything, but they were allowed to go to these schools and they did not academically qualify. I can tell you story after story. I know for a fact that Kevin Garnett went pro because he could not get a 700 on his SAT. He's going to tell another story, right? Because they create lore around these athletes that he wanted to go pro. But no, he took the test. I know people that played ball for Duke, and the reason why they had to leave Duke is because they could not do the schoolwork. John Thompson told us when Allen Iverson was at Georgetown, he could not do the schoolwork. Now, why couldn't he? Because he was not prepared to do that type of schoolwork as a youth. He was not academically prepared to go to Georgetown. He wasn't. So he shows up at Georgetown, he could not do the schoolwork. Now, they're going to come up with another reason why he had to leave, but he didn't do the schoolwork. I know for a fact that when Marbury was at Tech, he was taking remedial classes. Because when he was in high school in New York City, they were not preparing him to go to a school like Georgia Tech. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? That's not my commentary. That's not my perspective. That's not my point of view. These are facts. Again, when we've created millions of people that cannot discern between facts and something that is actually somebody's opinion, because the world is full of these talking heads who just say stuff, this is a problem that we have, and it leads into what we currently got right now today, and I'm going to show you that. Because people are missing the primary education that they need to be able to tell the difference between the two. And it shows up in testing. And then they're now out into the world and they're making decisions, but they can't tell between an opinion and a fact. But this should have been tested in school for you to be able to tell the difference. But because of the system, even if you show deficient in the testing, they push you on out. And we're going to show you that. So let's keep going. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's a guy out of the state of Florida, Calvin Russell, big time ball player out of Miami Northwest. He's supposed to go to Syracuse. They claimed he was going to play basketball and football there. So I think yesterday or the day before, they did their signing day at Northwest. He got up and said that he's not going to go to Syracuse. He don't know where he's going to go. Now, we know what time it is. Now we in the NIL era. They trying to put the bag together. So, he going to go to probably whoever got the right bag for him. I'm not mad at him because he need to make as much money as possible, because the likelihood of him playing pro ball is slim to none. So most likely they just ain't put the right bag together, right? But he said that he's not going to go to Syracuse. That's what he committed to. And I don't know why you commit to Syracuse as a football star, but that's a whole nother conversation for people that know football. But I just think the bag didn't get together. Now, we talked about before, if somebody was born after a certain year and they telling you that they was a certain type of athlete, it's documented, right? When I was coming up, it was harder because there wasn't as much media rankings, yada, yada, yada. But if somebody was born after a certain year and they telling you, yeah, when I was in high school, I was this, that, and the third in sports, well, it's documented. because everything's on the internet now. So when you look at that Calvin Russell, right? This is ESPN. Okay, he's considered a 4-star athlete, 4th in his position, 16th in the region, and number 5 ball player in the state. Right? Scout grade is an 87. So he's 6'6", 190, wide receiver. Go to Miami Northwest. He's committed to Syracuse. So you look at the schools, you look at his offers, look at his visits. Right? So he committed to Syracuse, visited Florida, LSU, Oregon, Miami, Florida State, and Michigan. But all these other schools gave him offers. So again, this is documented. So we were talking to Calvin Russell. This is not he say, she say. This is not my opinion. This is not my perspective. This is not my take. It is documented how he's been perceived as scouts. These are the people that actually gave him formal offers. Right? So he chose Syracuse. Again, Syracuse, from a football standpoint, don't rank with any of these schools. So to me, it was about the money, and the money probably not looking right, so they probably not go. Now, the money not looking right is my opinion. The fact that Syracuse is not on the same level as football with Florida, LSU, Oregon, Miami, Florida State, and Michigan is a fact. It's not my opinion. That is factual. It's not on the same level. Okay? And I don't know what's going on, because if he really wanted to get paid, he probably should have went to Michigan. But that's a whole nother story, because I heard he wanted to play basketball too. So he's a Miami Northwest product. So he comes out of the Miami Northwest area. We understand what area feeds into that particular school system. So here's what I want to see about Miami Northwest. Right? Miami Northwest Senior High School. It's in Miami, Florida. 81% African-American, 16% Hispanics, right? Less than 1% white, 70% people on free discounted lunch. Okay? Per pupil expenditure is $12,000. It's ranked 608 in 844 Florida high schools. Okay. Here's their test scores, 2025. This is Miami Northwest. This is Miami-Dade. And this is Florida. So you can look at it in the bar chart. Miami Northwest is in blue. Miami-Dade is in green. And Florida is in red. That's 9th grade. This 10th grade. Miami Northwest, 43. Miami-Dade 60, Florida 58%, right? That's the bar chart. So that's the English language arts test that they give these particular schools. So they coming in 9th grade, they go through the 9th grade year, they get the test, same thing, 10th grade. Now here's the issue. By the time they show up at Miami Northwest, they're already academically deficient. So Miami Northwest is in a position where they got to try to dig these kids out of a hole. You only got 4 years to do it. So this is one of the issues we have with these schools, is these kids show up at high school and they already don't know what they need to know. But they got pushed through to get to high school. Because if you look at Miami Northwest, they got a high graduation level. So they're graduating these kids, but they don't know what they need to know to be actually successful adults. Right? So we're not putting this young man in this boat. We're just saying these are the numbers from the school. Now let's keep going. End of course, algebra, right? Algebra 1, Miami Northwest 21, Miami-Dade 66, Florida 60%. End of course, geometry, Miami Northwest 37%, Miami-Dade 50%. So they're under their county, and they're also under the state of Florida. Biology, they're doing decent. History, they're doing all right. But in algebra and geometry, which is hard math and hard reading, they're lagging not only the local area, but they're also lagging the state of Florida. Okay? But they're putting these kids out. So what I want you to understand is that these young people that are playing ball for Miami Northwest, which people that know the state of Florida, Miami Northwest has been a football powerhouse since the 80s. It's a lot of pros came out of this school. But the academics have never been up to par. This is a problem. But we never talk about affirmative action in regards to college athletes, right? So when your favorite conservative commenter gets up there and talks about affirmative action, and some of them was college athletes, and I know good and well they didn't go to that school because of their academics, because they can barely put 2 sentences together now. But we never talk about affirmative action in college athletes and how many of these young people would not qualify for these universities if they were not playing sports. So let me tell you something that's the reality. Colleges have always done holistic admissions. What I mean holistic admissions is that they look at the total student situation and they say, we'll let you in. It's never been done where if you get a certain SAT score, you are guaranteed a right to this school. Colleges have never worked that way. So the attitude that colleges were giving some favoritism to Black people in affirmative action is false, because colleges never did just if you get a certain SAT score, you just automatically accepted into the school. Colleges never worked that way. It's always been holistic. And colleges determine what they want the actual environment of their school to be. So this is why historically you had a lot of Ivy League colleges wouldn't let Jews in, right? They wouldn't let Black people in too, but they definitely wouldn't let Jews in, because why? They didn't want Jews at their school. That was just how it was. Okay. So what I'm trying to tell you is that colleges have always done this, where they determine what kind of environment they want. So a college can say, hey, we got a Black student. They have a SAT score that may be a little bit lower than what we would always look for, but we think because of the environment that they come from, what they've been through, yada, 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 they will be a good fit for this particular school, because they can maybe bring something to this school that another person can't bring. Diversity of thought is really, really important in trying to solve problems. People that don't get paid to solve problems don't know that. But having people from different perspectives looking at things differently to solve problems is really, really important. This is why certain environments like the military, they very much want diversity in how to solve certain situations. But people that are not really in a position where they have to solve problems for a living don't understand that, right? If you just have everybody thinking the same way, it can be an issue when it comes to solving problems, because everybody thinks the same way. But schools have never had this hard and fast rule to where if you only have this SAT score, it allows you into the school. So a lot of the narratives that some of these far right-wing Asians are trying to promote is false, because schools never work that way. And schools never will work that way. Let me tell you a secret. Finance goes to tier 1 schools to get their people. They've done that historically always, right? So it can be very difficult to get accepted into certain investment banks if you haven't gone to what we call a tier 1 school. If Asians dominate tier 1 schools, you know what the investment banks will do? They'll figure out a different way to make sure white people get into those investment banks. That's just how this is going to work. There's no way in which Asians are going to be able to gamify the system to where people just have to accept them. Life don't work that way. They'll just figure out another way. But a lot of people in finance will tell you, well, I wasn't able to get into this particular investment bank or this program because I didn't go to an Ivy League school or Stanford or MIT may also be considered Ivy League. But if you don't go to like a certain handful of schools, a lot of the large investment banks, they won't even look at you, even if you're white. That's just the people that they want to deal with. So you got to go to maybe some of the lower tier operations, because the other bigger operations just won't look at you, right? Now, if you go off into the field and you make yourself a lot of money, it's a different scenario. But coming straight out of school, they won't even let you get an internship. But going back to the point, college athletes do get affirmative action. And I'm going to show you that in the numbers, but they do. So what we have is we have a lot of kids. Northwest is a football powerhouse. You go Google how many NFL players came out of Miami Northwest, and then kind of look at how many guys they put D1. It's a ridiculous amount of people every year. But we know that they're a school that is not great academically. So how are they getting these kids into these large schools? So look at the list of schools that this young man was supposed to go to. Now, we're not saying that he is not academically eligible. What we're asking is that look at these schools and ask yourself, right, because he's from the state of Florida. So there's 2 Florida schools that he visited. How difficult is it to get into these schools as an out-of-state student? What is going to be their academic criteria? And does he fit that? Now, it's impossible for us to get his SAT scores because he's a minor. But we would just ask the question, especially Miami, right? So it's 3 Florida schools, I'm sorry. But Michigan is not an easy school to get into, right? Some of these schools, would he be able to just academically qualify right straight into these schools? Penn State, right? A&M. Would he have been able to just academically qualify into some of these schools if he was not an athlete, based on his grades, his test scores, and a holistic evaluation of himself? So let's go to this particular article, right? This is the test that they're giving these young people in the state of Florida that Miami Northwest is struggling with. So we talked about this particular test, this English language, fast English language 2025. This is the test. right? Ninth grade. Okay. Now I'm gonna be real with you because we ain't gonna cut no corners, right? A lot of y'all watching this video right now, if y'all read this, y'all would struggle with it. I can tell just by how some of y'all exchange with me on the internet. So what they make you do is you read this passage, right? Just reading this passage would lose some of y'all. And then they make you answer questions to explain what's in the passage. So what are we talking about? Understanding the theme of the story. So what is the story talking about? What's the theme of it? And what do some of these words mean that are in this particular story? So we go now to vocabulary, we go to ability to read and comprehend what we've read. Okay? This is ninth grade level. I know a lot of grown people would struggle with this. This is what these kids are not doing well at Northwest. Because they're showing up without having the ability to do this. And they're going to graduate and still don't have the ability. So they're going to be the person on the internet where you're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're going to answer back 7, 8, 9, 10, and they're going to think they said something. But I never said that. Or the person that they can't stay on topic because they don't understand what the topic is. So they can't stay on topic if they don't know what the topic is. This is what gets produced. But these are the kind of tests they're giving these young folks that they're failing at. Okay, let's keep going. So this is an old article from 1993. Some of y'all weren't even born then. We're talking about Ray Lewis, who went to UM. This is from Florida Sun Sentinel. The first 4 times he took the SAT last year, he earned poor scores. Because of his inability to score 700 on the test, Hurricane coaches did not expect Lewis to be part of UN's freshman class that year. We didn't think he was going to make it. The recruiting coordinator said we had him all set up to do prep school to work on the test, which means you go to prep school, they get your grades up, and then you transfer to a university. On his 5th and final try, Lewis scored a 770, enabling him to get a last-minute reprieve. UM was the only school still waiting to offer him a scholarship. Okay, so this is documented. This is not my opinion. This is not he say, she say. Ray Lewis in 1993, on the 5th time he took the SAT, got a 770. Now, he went to Kathleen out in Lakeland. Okay? What did he not learn at Kathleen to what he struggled so much with this test just to get a 770? Now, the question we got to ask ourselves, and this could be difficult to find, is what was the average SAT score at UM in 1993? But UM is not an easy school to get into academically. It's not. It's a private school. It's a school for people that got money. It is not an easy school to get in academically. Their medical program, one of the top medical programs in the country, especially their pathology program. Ray Lewis was able to get into UM with a 770. That's not affirmative action. Right? What about his academics would justify him even being on that campus? But as long as it feeds the economic system, we don't care. It's only when a black person want to go to these schools because they want to try to improve themselves academically is when you don't qualify. But if you can play sports and you're going to make us money, yeah, you can come to our school. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? So this is why we got to ask ourselves, if we have the ability, do college athletes get affirmative action in college admissions? But they won't touch this because why you going to mess with the money? We're talking about billions and billions of dollars of revenue being produced by these athletes who should not be at these schools academically, but they're there. And they find a way to get them in. But when it's a black person trying to get in academically and they don't play sports, all of a sudden is, well, you don't hit the numbers. And we should only look at the numbers. And if you don't hit the numbers, you shouldn't get in. Now, how come the athlete get in there? But they won't pay you money to go research that. They won't pay these guys that work at these right-wing fellowships that talk about affirmative action. They're not going to finance that because now you're messing with the bag. And the sports bag is one of the biggest bags in this country, so you can't mess with that. So you start going down those rabbit holes, they'll cut you off. You're only supposed to look at what they tell you to look at. Let's keep going. So here's another write-up from Stack Athlete, different standards for athletes lagging scores. We're going to go into this. So UNC, Georgia Tech, Texas A&M, UCLA, University of Hawaii, even University of Florida. Some of the worst offenders are the athletes' performance on the SAT. Georgia Tech athletes scored 315 points lower than non-athletes. University of Florida athletes worst offender, with their athletes only scoring 890 points, which was 346 points lower than the rest of the student body. So guys was athletes for the University of Florida was able to get into Florida with an 890. You cannot get into Florida with an 890 as a freshman if you don't play ball. That's 346 points lower than the rest of the student body. And the 346 puts you at the low end. So that's the low end of the statistics. Most people at Florida, most incoming freshmen, they're going to be at the middle of the top end, right? This is 2019 to 2014. The problem with these numbers is they're old, right? Georgia Tech athletes scored 420 points lower than the non-athletes, with the athletes achieving an average of 1025, non-athletes achieving an average of 1445. So Tech, which is considered a really, really rigorous academic environment, athletes able to get in with a 1025, non-athletes get in with a 1445. Why are they there if they can't do the work? All these Georgia universities also utilize special admissions reasoning to bypass the minimum standards for these athletes to attend their institution. Georgia State utilized a highest with 87, UGA, which is University of Georgia, 63, Georgia Southern at 59, Georgia Tech at 31. So 240 special admissions were utilized for these athletes. What that means is that you're not supposed to be there. Now, we won't use the special admissions to get somebody in who just, they may come from a bad background. They may have come from an unstable background. They may not have come from an environment to where that was really, really good for them, where we believe that we can get them into our system and we can really build them up and they can do well for us. We just using that for sports athletes. And then create a narrative to where all the black people that are non-athletes shouldn't be at the school because they don't have the grades. But when it comes to the athletes, we don't want to talk about it because why? That's going to mess up the money. Right? This is UNC scandal. You got the one dude who's a snitch. I don't respect what he did, but he told his story where he talked about when he was at UNC, he'd be on a Gilbert Arenas show. When he talked about how he was at UNC, how they was just giving you the schoolwork and you didn't have to really show up for class. Right? Clarette told the same story. I don't like that because my thing is don't do it. And then when your career don't work out, then you want to tell on everybody. Because when you was doing it, you ain't had no problem with it. So different athletes have talked about when they was at school, there was not even a requirement for them to do the same schoolwork everybody else was doing. They was being handed tests. They was being handed grades. There was a lot of exceptions was being given so they can make sure that they could perform as an athlete. They didn't have to really do what the other students had to do. It's more affirmative action. Let's keep going. Here's an investigation, right? And we just do a bar chart. SAT scores. UGA, enrolled freshman, SAT scores 1239, UGA 977. Georgia Tech 1445. We talked about this before. Georgia Tech football players 1025. So enrolled freshmen is around 1400. SAT scores for football players 1025. Georgia State 1074. 935, Georgia Southern 1112, here 968. So if you play football for Georgia, you could come in with a much, much lower SAT score than the enrolled freshman. But that's not an issue of affirmative action. So what we have is we have a system to where there is no incentive to make sure that a lot of these kids get the proper education because we know that these schools are going to let them in just because they play sports. The problem is most of them are never going to have any career past their college if they make it to school. It's just not going to happen for them because it's a numbers game. So then when they don't know the proper things that they need to know to be successful in the society, they get put out into the world. But because there's such a large pool of people always coming in, there's no real financial incentive to change anything. Just doesn't exist. So this is a form of economic warfare. Because we're telling these kids the way out is playing sports. But most of y'all not going to make it playing sports. It's just not going to happen for you. So we never really invest in making sure that they get the proper education. But the average person can't read. So they're really not set apart. So they probably read a little bit worse than the average person. But we know that the average person can't read that well. Their reading comprehension is not that great. But everybody figures out how to make money off this situation. Now we're just finally letting the athletes make money. So that's why people talk to me about affirmative action. I'll tell you, I'm cool with it. Let's first get rid of affirmative action for white women. And then after we do that, let's get rid of affirmative action for athletes. And they never bring it up to me again. because they think I'm gonna argue the race thing with me, but I'm not, because I actually know what the numbers say. Right? I went to a predominantly white university. I've seen white chicks in some of my programs that was dumb as a box of bricks. Like, they really weren't that smart. Right? But they was there because they didn't want the class just to be full of all men. So it is what it is. Right? But that's what I want you to understand. I know a dude that played football. He played basketball for the school I went to. He would be turning in work 3 and 4 weeks late because he was playing basketball. And they was cool with it. They was making exceptions for him. They weren't going to make them exceptions for me, but they made it for him. So that's what I want you to understand, is that when they talk about affirmative action, to me, I want to talk about, okay, let's get rid of affirmative action for white women. Then let's talk about getting rid of affirmative action for athletes and make it to where if an athlete goes to that school, he would academically qualify for that school. That will cut out 95% of the majority, 95% of them, because they don't academically qualify, because they were never prepared from the beginning to academically qualify for these major institutions. These are some hard institutions to get in just with your schoolwork, which is why most people don't go to them. Right? That's going to be it. We ain't going to be here too long. We're not going to beat a dead horse. Appreciate everybody for coming through. Let me read these super chats and these comments. We're going to get up on out of here. So, Miss Phoenix, appreciate it. Hope you enjoy Pompano Beach. Enjoy it. Get that good sunshine, because it's way warmer down there than it is pretty much anywhere else inside the United States. So enjoy it. And, y'all might find a vacation property while y'all down there. Ray Gunn, man, appreciate the $2 super chat. Jason, man, appreciate you gifting somebody a membership. Big up to you. What's up to Miss Erica Williams, Classic Clown Smartphone Money? Appreciate the $5. Great topic. It's sad overall. Most athletes' problems started as kids. All flashbacks on parents. Definitely, Erica. I just think this attitude to where we've taught so many poor children that sports is a lottery ticket is because, in my opinion, because so many adults leverage children's success in sports for their professional success. So they don't really have an incentive to change the system. To me, in America, there's so much more to do than play sports. And the majority of people are never going to make it playing sports because they don't have the physical dimensions. They shouldn't even waste their time with like team sports, right? They just shouldn't waste their time. They should really worry about their academics and trying to get an education. But we have so many areas of this country to where the school systems are just failing children. The APS school system is not great. It's just failing kids. So they push them into sports as a way to get them out of trouble and to give them something to look forward to. But it's just not going to work out for most of these kids. And also the parents, they want their kids to be the big time athlete, which is a whole nother story. But big up to Miss Erica. So Jabrash trend trader, even if they make it broke, no financial literacy was ever taught to them. Well, that wouldn't make them outside the average American. So the average American doesn't have any financial literacy. And financial literacy is actually a marketing term, because what I would call financial literacy to me could be different than somebody else, right? So I would ask somebody, what's the risk-adjusted rate of return on capital? And they would look at me like I'm crazy. So to me, they don't have any financial literacy. So to me, that's a very subjective term. What I think people need to learn is how to budget based on their lifestyle. So they don't end up like Odell, right? I think that would be more specific, how to budget based on their lifestyle. Financial literacy very much is a marketing term that's very subjective. It's very generalized, right? Because I would ask somebody, hey, do you know what the hurdle rate is? And they would be like, what are you talking about? To me, they're not financial literate, right? So I don't think that's the reason, that's the issue, because financial literacy will mean different things to different people. Miss Erica says, one of my cousins went to 3 different colleges on football scholarships. He didn't have enough to graduate, was recruited by Canadian Football League. Yeah, big up to the Canadian Football League. Yeah, I just think because sports is so big, it's just gonna find a way. It's gonna find a way. They will continue to keep the ball rolling, is what I meant to say. Because I know guys that also have done that. I come from an era, man, Erica, where people was playing at 4 different high schools over the course of their high school career. Like, it was crazy. People getting recruited to go to high schools, all kind of stuff was going on because sports was just that big, especially in basketball. So social media says the reason why Odell Beckham Jr. got 100 million and suddenly broke. What I've seen with a lot of athletes that have gone broke is they spent money on their family more than they just blew their money. Now, some of them do blow a lot of their money, but what I've experienced with guys I know that play pro sports is a lot of them have financial issues trying to give their family the same lifestyle they got, which is hard to do, right? Okay, so that's going to be it, man. Y'all stay safe. Y'all stay encouraged. Talk to you later.